We are going to have lots and lots of models, lots and lots of theories that we go through during the course. And they are here to help us to do a bit more analysis. So we have already said that there will be times when you want to recruit the correct person. How can we do that? What do we need to look for? So Rogers, who is the first of the writers that we're going to talk about, Rogers comes up with 7 different things to look for when you're looking for a personality, when you're looking for a person specification. Some of these will be more important than others, depending on what the job is. So, the things that Rogers comes up with, first of all, things like the physical makeup. He's talking there about things like the person's health. Now, obviously, whatever kind of job we've got, we want somebody who's going to be reasonably healthy. But in some jobs, it is more important than in others. For example, when you are recruiting a lecturer to do what I do, health is actually very, very important. And the reason is that because I have a timetable, which means I do not have that many spare days left over. My students have timetables without many spare days left over. So, if I am ill, if I'm away from work because I am sick, and we need to try and reschedule a class, it's difficult to find a day that I have got free, and also my students will have free. So the easiest thing to do is to actually come into class, even if you're not very well. So general good health is quite important for a lecturer, simply because it's very difficult to rearrange things if a lecturer is off sick. Attainments. Things like qualifications. As a lecturer in accountancy, what kind of qualifications do you expect that I have got? Well, presumably, one of the key things, because I'm training you to be an accountant, would be for me to have an accountancy qualification, which I have. I am a qualified accountant. So there may well be things that you need particular qualifications that you want from a particular person. So, I am a qualified accountant. I am also, interestingly enough, I'm also a qualified teacher, although I can't say that for all the lecturers here. But all the lecturers here are all qualified accountants. So you would expect me to be a qualified accountant because I'm trying to help you to get through your accountancy qualifications. General intelligence. Now, obviously, in this particular case, that is probably covered by the one that we've just said. So, because I've passed all my accountancy exams, I think we can probably work out that I had the intelligence to do those. But in other situations, it might be that there aren't any formal qualifications that we want. It may not be appropriate, but we want someone who's got a general level of intelligence. Any particular special aptitudes. So that might be particular skills that we have got. As far as being a lecturer is concerned, probably there aren't that many of them. I suppose you could include things like writing the material, which is different to talking about the material. It's different to delivering a lecture. So I suppose special aptitudes writing, being able to write reasonably good business English, would probably be a reasonable aptitude that you could expect for this kind of job. Again, it will be different for other kinds of jobs. Interests. That will be things outside of work. To be honest with you, that really doesn't make an awful lot of difference as far as my job is concerned, but it may do for others. Disposition is things like your attitude. Now, one of the things that you have to think about, if you wanted to recruit somebody to be a lecturer, one of the things they have to be able to do is to stand up in front of groups of people and talk to them. Now, I have, as throughout my career as a lecturer, I've spoken to some very small groups of students. The smallest group I've ever spoken to is 1. So I've had 1 student in the class. The biggest I've ever had is about 400. So you have to be able to stand up and talk potentially to 400 people, potentially to 1 person. I suppose you could argue that doing this particular kind of video, technically I'm actually talking to nobody except the camera. And I have to say, this is a slightly different, this is a slightly strange thing for me to be doing, to be giving a lecture, and there's actually nobody physically present. So the idea is you've got to have the attitude that you are able to do that if you are going to be a lecturer. Now, there are lots of jobs, particularly things like service industries, where you are dealing with customers, where that would be a particularly important one. Are you happy at dealing with customers? Are you friendly? Are you approachable? So your disposition could be a particularly important thing. And finally there, your circumstances. That would mean things such as, do you have a family? Because that might affect your ability to work certain hours, or when you would be available to come and maybe work unsociable hours. So circumstances might make a difference. Now, there are 7 different things there. Rogers does not say that they are all important all of the time. What you would have to do if you were a manager is to think which of those would be the most important. So for a lecturer, probably things like the attainments, the disposition, and the health, the physical makeup, would probably be amongst the most important ones. For another kind of situation, something different might be important. Now, the key thing with Rogers is that we look for the right person. We look to see, has the person that we're looking at, what kind of person do we want? Are we worried about their disposition? Are we worried about their attitude? Are we worried about their qualifications? What is the most important? And then we know who to look for. So, once we have recruited the right person, then, once we've recruited and selected the right person, then we will worry later on about exactly what they are going to do. Now, why do you think a person specification is an important thing for a lecturer? Because if you think about being a lecturer, it's very difficult to write down an exact list of all the tasks that a lecturer has to do. An awful lot of it is dealing with students, and you can't tell how students are going to react to something. So it'd be very difficult to write down and say, here are all the tasks that you want a lecturer to do. So it's actually easier just to get the right kind of personality and then let them get on with the job, and they will deal with all these tasks, let them get done however they feel is best. So a person specification is where we decide we're going to have the right person, and then later on we're going to worry about what they actually do. Okay, over the page we have got the stages that we go through when we're looking at recruitment and the stages that we go through when we're looking at selection. So first of all, when we're going through recruitment, gap analysis, what we're thinking about there is we're thinking about, are there any new roles to create? Do we have any gaps? So, for example, it could simply be that an organisation is getting bigger and needs more people to do something. So at the moment, we have got one person who is doing all the administration. The company is growing bigger. We now need 2 people to do all this administration. So it could simply be a physical gap. We need more people. It could also be a physical gap from the point of view of perhaps we are expanding. So we have got somebody who does a particular job in the UK. We are going to open up another office in the Far East. We will need somebody to do the same work, but in a different location. So again, there would be a gap there. It might be, for example, that the organisation is expanding, perhaps by doing something new. So we have got an organisation that has always trained ACCA students, and now we decide that we're going to start training other kinds of students. Perhaps we're going to start training legal students. Well, there will be some gaps there, because obviously the people who do the training for accountants will not necessarily be the same people that you'd want training legal students. So the idea is that we might identify a gap because we're branching out into something new. So for whatever reason, there will be some kind of gap. So we have to identify what that gap is. Once we know that there's a gap there, we then have to think, can that gap be filled with somebody that we already have on the staff? So maybe if there is extra administration, we might be able to get somebody who already works here to do part of that work. So maybe what we get is 2 or 3 people who've got other jobs and give them a little bit of the administration each. That way we don't need to employ a new person. But if there is a lot of work to do, or the new job is in a different location, then obviously we will need to get a new person. So what we can do is we can identify some vacancies. We can make the decision that we're going to recruit people. As I say, your alternative is to share the work out amongst the staff you've already got. Once we've decided that we're going to recruit, we have some kind of job analysis or some kind of person specification. So we've already talked about person specifications. You look for the right kind of person with the right kind of skills. Job analysis, we are looking for, here are the tasks that somebody is going to do. So we're going to make sure we get somebody with skills and experience. And once we've done that, we advertise. So there's quite a long and detailed process that comes out before you actually advertise anything. The second thing we do, once we've done the recruitment, is we now start doing the selection. So first of all, we review people's CVs. Now, if you haven't come across what a CV means, it's basically shorthand for what's called a curriculum vitae, which is a fancy way of saying it's a summary of what you are like. It has things like your background, the schools you went to, the qualifications you've got. It would also have details about what previous posts you've had, what skills you have gained, what experience and knowledge you have got. We would look through those CVs. There would be some candidates who are obviously not right for the job, and we would have to contact them and say, unfortunately, we're not going to be pursuing your application any further. But there will be other people that we are interested in meeting and finding out a little bit more about. A little bit later on, we'll be talking about interviews and we'll be talking about what are called assessment centres. Both of those are used to try and find the correct candidate. So we might have 6 or 7 people that we interview for a particular job. We then have to select the one that we are particularly interested in, and we have to let them know. Curiously enough, that's the one part of the selection process that students normally forget about. So you choose the right person and you don't actually tell them. So, offer letter to the candidate, and then we have what's called induction. Now, induction is a very important stage. This is where we're going to introduce them. So, introduce them to the organisation. It will involve things such as meeting new colleagues. It will involve things like introduction to the culture of the organisation. That will mean things like telling them how we do things in this particular company. So how do we operate? What forms need filling in? Who do you need to speak to if you have a problem with this? How do you fill in an expenses form and who do you give it to? What kind of computer system do we have and who do you contact if it doesn't work properly? All these basic kind of things so they can get on and do their job. And induction is a very, very important part of the selection and the recruitment. Now that we've looked at the various stages that you go through when you're doing recruitment or when you're doing selection, we're going to look at how you're going to let people know about these jobs in a bit more detail. So the first thing that we've got, 2 main methods of recruitment. Either an organisation does its own recruitment And the main way that it will do this is by placing adverts for jobs, and we'll talk about that in a minute, or alternatively, use a recruitment agent to carry out the recruitment. Now, why would you want to perhaps carry out your own recruitment? Maybe you are looking for something in particular. That might be, for example, that something is very technical. And so you, as an organisation, want to make sure you hire the right people. So you want to actually place the advert, have it exactly how you want it, perhaps do all the interviewing, you perhaps want to choose everybody. So if you want to go down this route, it's usually because there are particular skills or particular people that you want to try and recruit, and you feel that your organisation would understand them better than an outside organisation like a recruitment agent. So you can do either of these two. You can, of course, if you want to, use a recruitment agent. There are lots of reasons why you might do that. We'll talk about them again a little bit later, but it might just be something as simple as your organisation's got other things to do. Let's leave the recruitment to some specialists. So in the exam, that will probably be a practical thing. Here is a small company. The senior directors are all very, very busy. They do something very, very specialised. What's going to be the best thing for them to do? Well, they could use a recruitment agent because they're all very busy and recruiting people takes time. On the other hand, if they do it themselves, they will make sure they get the right person. So it'd be up to you to look at the facts that you are told and to give your opinion. So, if we decide that we are going to do our own recruitment and we're going to place our own adverts, there are a number of things that we need to consider. First of all, where are you actually going to place your adverts? They need to be placed in an appropriate place, an appropriate way. So, something that is becoming more and more common is looking at things like doing advertising for jobs on the internet. What is the advantage of that? Well, the biggest advantage is that there is a large pool of candidates. If you are advertising a job on the internet, then anybody around the world who has access to the internet could potentially apply for that job. So that would obviously open up the number of people who might be interested and the number of good quality candidates that you will get. The downside of advertising on the internet is, in a way, it's exactly the same. You might get so many candidates applying that it becomes difficult to rule out who are the ones you're interested in and who are the perhaps ones that you're not going to be as interested in. So the internet is becoming more and more common. You could advertise in specialist journals. Now that would be something like, a good example of a specialist journal is something like the ACCA student newsletter. Do you ever see jobs advertised in the ACCA newsletter? The answer is obviously yes. What kind of jobs? Will there be accountancy jobs? Why would accountants advertise in the ACCA newsletter? Because they know that that newsletter is read by lots of potential trainee accountants. So it makes sense to advertise the job somewhere where there's going to be a lot of potential candidates. So what's good about advertising in a specialist magazine? You are not wasting your money advertising in a newspaper where an awful lot of people are not in the slightest bit interested in the job that you are advertising. So you get specialist magazines for various professions, for various jobs, so advertise in those. You often get those particular kind of adverts. They're not for junior level positions. They're not for what are called entry level positions, the first job somebody has as an accountant. They're often for something where you need 2 or 3 years experience, because they're often going to be students who have got 2 or 3 years experience. They will be able to find out about those jobs and they'll apply for them. So specialist journals are a good, cost-effective way of meeting on advertising your job to the kind of person that you want. Then very, very good if you've done some kind of job analysis, because you can work out where people with the right experience, where people with the right skills will see your advertisement. They don't work as well for person specifications, because if you want the right kind of person, they may not necessarily be reading that particular magazine. So they work well in certain circumstances, but not in all of them. The third option we've got is in the local press. So perhaps a newspaper that's based in a particular city, or even in a large city, perhaps a particular part of that city. Again, these are particularly good for entry-level jobs. The kind of junior positions that somebody has when they first come in to a particular industry, when they have very little experience. Why is the local press good? Because you're not looking for anybody with particular skills, because they won't have got those skills yet. You're probably looking for somebody relatively young, and because of that, they probably won't necessarily have a lot of money, so they will probably be living locally. So the idea is that you advertise to where these people are going to read about your organisation. So the local press is a good way of getting more junior level jobs. And finally, you might decide to advertise in the national press. Now, this one isn't as common. You do see it occasionally, but it's not as common because it's quite expensive. Really, the time that you'd be looking in the national press would be when you want somebody particularly senior, and you're just trying to make everybody aware that this job has come up. You might only have maybe 30 or 40 people in the entire country who are even qualified to apply for this job. So the national press might be the only way of getting to them. So all of those are good in different ways. The internet is good because it's relatively cheap and you reach a lot of people. Specialist journals are good because they're relatively cheap and they get to people with particular skills and experience. Local press is relatively cheap and it gets to people with very little experience. National press is expensive, but it may be the only way of people who you are interested in, of them actually finding out about your job. So they're all good in different ways. Now, when we are going to do our advertisement, what do we need to say? Well, obviously, it depends on what the position is. If it's an entry-level position, if for something it's like a trainee accountant with no experience necessary, you probably don't need to put an awful lot in. On the other hand, if it's going to be for somebody with 2 or 3 years experience, you need to be more detailed about what the job is going to entail and what the company is going to be doing. So here are the sort of things that you may include. Some kind of job description. Again, for an entry-level position, you probably don't need that, but a more senior one, you do. What is the job going to be? Is it perhaps being in charge of a team of people? Is it perhaps doing something that's very technical? So what's the job going to be? Maybe a little bit on what the organisation actually does. If you want to get good candidates to apply to your organisation, you'll need to give them some clues as to why they should do. What's good about your particular organisation? There will be many people who've never heard of your company. So give them an overview of what the organisation is like and why it would be a good organisation to come and work for. Obviously, the salary is going to be important. For some people, that will be perhaps the main reason why they'll even consider a job. But even if salary is not that important to a person, you still need to give them a vague idea of what it's going to be. Person specification. Although we are probably looking, because we've got a job description, we are probably looking at somebody with skills and experience. There may also be some kind of person specification in there, particularly for some kind of senior job, or perhaps where it's not going to be overly clear what the job will entail. Somebody, for example, who is going to be dealing with heads of other departments. Good communication skills would be important, regardless of what the jobs actually are. So, again, in more senior roles, that one is often quite important. And finally, something that's very, very rare that people actually forget about a lot. If you are interested in the job, how are you going to find out more about it? Who are you going to send your details to? Some kind of contact information. Finally, in this little section, it says a variation on this is where we have something like a recruitment fair. And a recruitment fair is where you get a large number of organisations who all go to one particular location. And then graduates, they're often graduate recruitment fairs, but people who are interested in the jobs will come along to the particular location and they can go and find out about lots of companies in one go. Now, the reason I've put it with advertisements is because people will pick up information about the organisation. In effect, you are still advertising why they should come to you. Why should they come to this stall rather than the other 49 companies who are all advertising in the same place? So you need to still advertise to recruit them. So, job advertisements. As we said a little bit earlier, an alternative is to simply use a recruitment agent to get somebody else to do all of this for you. Now, there are various reasons why you might decide that this is what you want to do. We can see here that there are various reasons why we might decide to use recruitment agencies rather than others. We've got a list of them. Before we start looking at that, just be careful, because there are two different ways that recruitment agents work. Most of you will have come across a recruitment agent. And what happens with a recruitment agent is you go to the recruitment agent with your CV, you have an interview with the recruitment agent, and they will then get jobs given to them by various companies, and they will recommend you for certain of those jobs. So, you go along, you have an interview with the recruitment agent, they find out what you're interested in, they find out what your experience is, and a job comes in that they think you'd be suitable for. They then send your CV off to the company, and usually the company will then want to interview you. But that's not the only way it can operate. The alternative way things can operate is the complete reverse of that. It's what is sometimes called as headhunting. And the idea behind headhunting is what happens initially is the company goes to the recruitment agents and says, we have got a job, please find somebody to fill it. So the normal way that happens is you have already gone along, you are already registered with the recruitment agent, a job comes in and they say, here is somebody who is on our books, they would be suitable. Headhunting, the opposite works. Here is a job, go out and find somebody that you've had no contact with so far and see if they would be interested in this job. Headhunting tends to be used a lot more for senior positions than it is for junior positions. Now, there are some advantages of using a recruitment agency. First of all, as we've already said, less distracting for managers. If I am a manager in a small company, I have got other things to get on and do. I haven't got time to worry about recruitment as well. I know it's important, but I just don't have time to worry about it. So I will simply pay a recruitment agent and let them worry about it. That way I can get on with what I am good at. It may be faster. The ideal candidate might have already gone to the recruitment agent. The recruitment agent might already have this person's details. So rather than having to go and advertise and get a CV and all these kind of things, it can be a lot faster because the recruitment agent has already done quite a lot of this. I can gain access to all the people on the recruitment agent's books wherever they live, whatever magazines that they read. Potentially, if the right candidate is there, I can find them quickly and easily. The agency has knowledge of how to recruit staff. This is something we will see again later on during the course. I am perhaps the chief accountant in an organisation and I want to recruit some more accountants. Now, I'm an accountant. That's what my skill is in. That's what my experience is in. That is what my knowledge is in. Recruiting people, I may not have the skills to do it. So just simply pay somebody else to do it on your behalf. Get a recruitment agent to do it. And finally in that bit, salaries. If I have got to recruit someone, I would have no idea what kind of salary they would expect. So, a recruitment agent will be able to do that for you and say, for this kind of job, in this kind of location, for this kind of company, you should be offering this sort of amount of money. So there are lots of advantages to using recruitment agents. Unfortunately, there are lots of disadvantages as well. So, the main one is the agency doesn't really know what the organisation is like. The recruitment agent has not worked in this particular company. So they don't know what it's like. So they don't necessarily know exactly what kind of person the company wants to recruit. So sometimes they'll choose the wrong person. You might have a recruitment agent that perhaps has a target. We have got to get 100 people into employment by the end of the month. And if we do that, we get a bonus. Well, maybe they will just send you somebody just to meet that recruitment target, even if they're not particularly suitable. Hopefully that one doesn't happen very often in real life, but it's a possibility. And thirdly, it can be expensive. You will have to pay a fee to the recruitment agent, and it's often quite a substantial fee. So that's money that you could have used to do this yourself. So you have to decide whether it is worth it for the extra skills that they bring, for the extra time that they save.